Chapter 397, Live Forever Tavern. Not very far into the desert itself were the crumbled ruins of a temple, which was the entrance to a necropolis that stretched out under the surface of the city. The necropolis was huge, almost half the size of Sky City itself. All sorts of rare beasts, immortal grasses, and spirit plants grew there. It was a source of abundant resources for cultivators. The ruins of the necropolis were the only place where disciples could go on missions inside Sky City itself. In fact, many of sect missions required that disciples go there. It was a special place, much safer than locations on the outside. Although it was indeed the ruins of an ancient necropolis, it had been put there by the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect for the express purpose of allowing disciples to train. There were some creatures and areas in the ruins that certain disciples couldn't easily handle alone, but they were few and far between. Furthermore, Sky City itself was considered to be inside of the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect, and as such, many disciples preferred to come to this place to go on missions. Because of that, it tended to be a very bustling place. The land itself was extremely valuable, and no one in Sky City other than the Celestial Sky Society was powerful enough to set up shop there. Generally speaking, they let anyone inside, but when people came out, they were required to share 30% of whatever profits they had acquired inside. Either that, or they had to spend a significant amount of merit points to get a special command medallion from the Celestial Sky Society that let them go on their way with no questions asked. Only the Celestial Sky Society, with their Deva clan background, could do such a thing. Many people had thought of trying to take similar advantage of the ruins, but the Celestial Sky Society wouldn't let them. After all, the Celestial Sky Society had paid an enormous price for the right to take control of that location, and the profits they earned made up more than 50% of their total income. With such enormous profit at stake, the Celestial Sky Society obviously viewed the place as being extremely important. As Bai Xiaochun led his group of over 100 people toward the desert, everyone was shocked, including the cultivators from the Celestial Sky Society. What's wrong with this Azure Dragon Society? What do they think they're going to do here? Don't tell me that they want to go into the necropolis ruins to go on some missions. It doesn't look like that's what they're doing. Outside of the ruins was a checkpoint manned by large numbers of Celestial Sky Society cultivators, and as soon as they saw Bai Xiaochun and his followers heading their way, serious expressions appeared on their faces, and they rose to their feet. There was also quite a crowd of cultivators preparing to go into the ruins to go on missions. When they saw the big group approaching, curious expressions appeared on their faces. Nobody said a word. As for the Azure Dragon Society cultivators Bai Xiaochun had brought with him, none of them really understood what was happening, not even Big Fatty Zhang and the other Dao protectors. Finally, Zhu Bokai couldn't hold back from asking, "Junior Patriarch, what are we doing here?" "This is where we're moving to," Bai Xiaochun replied loudly, not even bothering to look back. Instead, he simply kept his eyes fixed ahead as he walked forward, completely ignoring the Celestial Sky Society cultivators. Those cultivators didn't dare to get in Bai Xiaochun's way. Not only was he a gold core cultivator, more importantly, the rules of the Celestial Sky Society stated that anyone could enter the ruins. It was only upon leaving that they had to pay the Celestial Sky Society their share of the loot. Bai Xiaochun passed the Celestial Sky Society cultivators, and then stopped at a point roughly 3,000 meters from the ruins of the temple. After looking around for a moment, he seemed to be quite pleased. "Alright," he announced, "this is our new home." Master God Diviner blinked a few times and then glanced around. A blank look could be seen in Zhu Bokai's eyes, and Big Fatty Zhang was staring mutely in shock. Even Chen Minyao's jaw had dropped. If they had such a reaction, there was little need to even consider how the other cultivators from the Azure Dragon Society reacted. They simply exchanged blank, awkward stares. When the Celestial Sky Society cultivators heard Bai Xiaochun's words, they immediately burst into loud laughter. "Very amusing. They think they're going to live here or something? This whole area belongs to the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect, not any individual person. Just what does the Azure Dragon Society think they're going to do?" They weren't the only ones who found it hard to hold back from laughing. The crowd which had followed along, as well as the cultivators who had gathered in preparation of entering the ruins, were all roaring with laughter. "I know the Azure Dragon Society got castigated recently, but don't tell me they're all actually insane. Do they really think they can just settle down in this place? Boss Azure Dragon is a core formation cultivator, but even he couldn't have taken over this area during the height of his power. This place is the lifeblood of the Celestial Sky Society, and they're backed by a Deva clan. If Azure Dragon Society tries to settle down here, that clan will definitely put them in their place." As the mocking laughter surrounded them, Master God Diviner's face turned red, and Zhu Bokai looked very awkward. Furthermore, the embarrassment and confusion in the eyes of the Azure Dragon Society cultivators grew deeper. Big Fatty Zhang and Chen Minyao coughed dryly, and appeared to be hesitating about whether or not to say anything. "Xiaochun." In that moment, Bai Xiaochun stuck his chin up and waved his sleeve, sticking his arm out to reveal what was clasped in his hand, a small, 7-colored flag, shining with dazzling light. Instantly, intense pressure weighed down on the area, and all the laughter ceased. As for Bai Xiaochun, he looked very pleased with himself as he cast the little flag straight down into the ground at his feet. "Activate," he roared. The instant the little flag pierced into the ground, heaven shaking, earth-shattering rumbling filled the air, a sound like the crashing of thunder. Rumble! Everything began to shake violently as a gale force wind spiraled out of the little flag, engulfing the entire area and causing even more intense pressure to weigh down. The Tao protectors' faces flickered, and they backed up, gasping. The Celestial Sky Society cultivators, the passers-by, and the cultivators hoping to go on missions all began to edge backward. The pressure weighing down on them seemed like heavenly might, the source of which was the little flag that Bai Xiaochun had just stabbed down into the ground. As the wind screamed and the lands shook, Bai Xiaochun's hair whipped about him, and the 7-colored light swept out, filling the 300-meter area around the flag. However, things weren't over yet. The light continued to spread, and in the blink of an eye, had filled 1.5 kilometers. Then 2.5 kilometers. And finally, 5 kilometers. 7-colored ripples filled that entire area, completely replacing the desert sands which had existed there before. Everything flickered with scintillating light, as well as silence, which was broken only by the gasps of the other cultivators in the area. But then, before any of them could react, the land began to tremble again, and more intense rumbling sounds rose up as the 7-colored ripples slowly merged into the ground. As they vanished, an enormous sealing mark became visible. An enormous, indelible sealing mark. Then, a powerful force of expulsion appeared, a force which no one in the area could possibly fight back against as it wrapped around them and removed them from the 5-kilometer area. Everyone was completely flabbergasted. That was the force of expulsion that the Starry Sky Tao polarity sect spell formations create for personal property. That's impossible. How could that be a true force of expulsion? Heavens! Only people who have the approval of the Starry Sky Tao polarity sect's grand spell formation can have personal property with a spell formation like that. There aren't even 10 locations in all of Sky City that are personal property. I can't believe Boss Azure Dragon can stake claim to personal property. The surrounding cultivators felt as if lightning were crashing around in their minds, giving rise to shouts of astonishment and disbelief. Even the people from the Azure Dragon Society, including the Tao protectors, were all struck mute with astonishment. However, most mind-blowingly shocking of all was that the entrance to the necropolis ruins was located within that 5-kilometer area. As the cries of shock rose up, Bai Xiaochun stood there with his hands clasped behind his back and his chin held high. Looking extremely pleased with himself, he said, "Ahem. I'll be setting up a little inn right here, and I already thought of a name for it. It's going to be called the Live Forever Tavern. Everyone, feel free to enter the necropolis just as before. However, since this place is my home, before entering, I request that you enjoy a cup of spirit tea. Once you do, you're considered a friend." Then he cleared his throat, smiled broadly, and continued, "Don't worry, a cup of spirit tea is very cheap. Furthermore, when it comes to the loot from inside the necropolis, I'll charge much less than the Celestial Sky Society did. Only 10%. The people from the Celestial Sky Society felt their hearts surging with shock. Control of the entrance to the ruins had just been viciously wrenched out of their control. As for all of the other cultivators, their eyes began to shine brightly. The Celestial Sky Society had charged 30%, so obviously, the Azure Dragon Society was doing everything they could to keep the masses happy. Chapter 398, Mid-Gold Core Stage. As soon as Bai Xiaochun took the 7-colored flag given to him by the Sky Quarter Peak Lord and stabbed it into the ground in that desert, everything in the 5-kilometer area around it became his personal property. The matter instantly caused a major commotion within Sky City. The news spread like wildfire, until everyone in the entire city was talking about the matter in tones of complete shock and disbelief. Personal property? How is that even possible? There are less than 10 places in all of Sky City that count as personal property, and they are only given out as rewards for people who perform incredible meritorious service for Sky Quarter Rainbow. The Azure Dragon Society obviously has some powerful backers. That's what I said. Everyone was wondering why the Azure Dragon Society dared to challenge the Celestial Sky Society, and now we know. The boss Azure Dragon is incredibly mysterious and unfathomable. It wouldn't be surprising if he had a Deva on his side. Even as word spread in the city, the news was brought to the leadership of the Celestial Sky Society, who reacted with looks of dumbfounded shock. They had worked themselves to the bone fighting against the Azure Dragon Society both physically and in terms of wits. Now, Bai Xiaochun had unleashed a deadly counter-strike. Just when he seemed to have been defeated without possibility of recovery, he turned everything around. The Celestial Sky Society simply couldn't accept the situation. Personal property. Countless cries of shock filled the Celestial Sky Society, and many members were filled with bitterness and hesitation. In the briefest of moments, everyone's opinions of the Azure Dragon Society had completely changed. After all, they now controlled the only entrance into the necropolis ruins. As for everyone who had recently abandoned the Azure Dragon Society, their hearts swelled with regret, and yet, there was nothing they could do about the situation. The Azure Dragon Society wasn't recruiting anymore, and rejected any people who took the initiative to apply for membership. It didn't take long before, there in the desert in the west district of the city, right next to the entrance to the necropolis ruins, a tavern was erected by the over 100 members of the Azure Dragon Society. It was a huge tavern consisting of multiple structures, and even had outdoor seating under numerous tented pavilions. The more than 100 members of the Azure Dragon Society became waiters who specialized in selling spirit tea. People who wanted to enter the necropolis ruins couldn't do so with the Celestial Sky Society command medallion. Instead, they had to buy a cup of tea. It only took a few days to build the tavern, and then it was open for business. Of course, Sky City was a subsidiary of Sky Quarter Rainbow, and yet not a single peep had been heard from there regarding the matter. Apparently, no one up on the rainbow cared about what was happening, and that in and of itself was extremely telling. It also fueled even more speculation regarding the mysterious background of Boss Azure Dragon. Time passed, and the Celestial Sky Society was forced to simply deal with the situation. Soon, the number of people entering the ruins returned to its normal rate, and before long, the fact that the Azure Dragon Society was only collecting 10% of the profits from inside ensured that more and more cultivators chose that location to go on missions. Eventually, more than 100,000 disciples were entering the ruins on a daily basis. Considering the volume of customers, it was little wonder that the Azure Dragon Society was very busy. Soon, the outdoor pavilion seating couldn't accommodate the crowds, and they had to erect even more pavilions. In terms of the merit point profit, when Bai Xiaochun checked into it, he gasped. They were earning so much more profit than when they had been selling fantasy pills that it was simply terrifying. The Celestial Sky Society must be filthy rich, he said, swallowing hard. Next to him, Big Fatty Zhang looked at the merit point reports, his eyes shining as he likewise denounced the Celestial Sky Society. No one personally kept the merit point profits. They were collected in a command medallion belonging to the organization as a whole. That way, the millions of merit points wouldn't accidentally force anyone to rise to the position of a yellow-robed disciple if they didn't want to. In fact, Bai Xiaochun was actually very worried that he one day might accidentally get himself promoted to yellow-robed disciple. If that happened, he would probably cry himself to death. Therefore, he was very careful never to have more than a few 100,000 merit points on his person at any given time. Most of the merit points were stored in the Azure Dragon Society's joint command medallion. A few days passed, and the tavern continued to explode in popularity. As for the Celestial Sky Society, their income dwindled. They had lost the fantasy pills, and they had lost their control of the ruins. After much debate, they finally sent people to try to work out a deal with the Azure Dragon Society. Bai Xiaochun had Master God Diviner and Zhu Bokai handle the negotiations. Naturally, the Azure Dragon Society didn't agree to any compromises, and eventually just drove the Celestial Sky Society cultivators away. Bai Xiaochun felt very pleased with himself. By now, Sky City truly felt like home, and his share of the merit point profits was very satisfactory. Ah, now this is life, he thought, standing on a balcony in the tavern, looking down at all the hustle and bustle. Even more pleasing to Bai Xiaochun was that because of his recent cultivation progress, he had reached the point of an imminent breakthrough. From what he could tell, it would only be a few days before he reached the mid-gold core stage. Therefore, he set aside external matters and went into secluded meditation in a secret room in the tavern, hoping to achieve that breakthrough as quickly as possible. That session of secluded meditation lasted for a month. At that point, Bai Xiaochun's eyes snapped open, and a bright blue light could be seen in his pupils. At the same time, intense streams of frigid chi were rolling off of him. The frigid chi soon filled the entire area, causing the temperature in the chamber to drop rapidly. Cracking sounds could be heard as ice began to cover the walls, ceiling, and roof. Frigid acolytes can form frigid shadows and unleash the magic of frigid coldness. As for frigid adepts, they can freeze everything in a 3,000-meter area. With that, he waved his hand. Instantly, his hand turned as clear as crystal, making it possible to see the blood flowing through the veins beneath his skin. Apparently, the cold in the chamber didn't affect him at all. Time to break through, he said. Rising to his feet, he sped out of the secret chamber, and before anyone could detect his passage, was gone from the tavern. He became a beam of light, shooting through the air to appear in a location deep in the desert. It was a remote area with no signs of life whatsoever, and definitely no cultivators from Sky City. Few people would ever come to a distant place like this. It was a place that blistered with intense heat. Despite being so close to the Heavenspan River and the Heavenspan Sea, this was still a desert, and the temperature was so high that it distorted the air, making it difficult to see anything clearly. As Bai Xiaochun stood there, the blue light in his eyes grew more intense. After looking around to confirm that there really was no one present, he suddenly closed his eyes, whereupon a blast of intense frigid chi spread out to fill the 300-meter area around him. Instantly, the blazing heat of the desert was completely neutralized, and the ground even froze up. In fact, because of the sudden juxtaposition of hot and cold, thunderous rumbling sounds filled the air. However, things weren't over yet. Bai Xiaochun rotated his cultivation base, and as the power of the frigid school will evolving incantation erupted, he performed a double-handed incantation gesture, causing the 300-meter area of coldness to expand rapidly. Rumble, 600 meters, 900 meters, 1,500 meters. And yet, the process was not over. Bai Xiaochun's hair whipped around him, and although his eyes were closed, it couldn't stop the blue light from spilling past his eyelids and spreading out in all directions. Both of his hands were as translucent as crystal, making it seem almost as if he were made of ice. The area of frigid chi soon reached 2,100 meters, and the cracking sounds continued as the heat of the desert was driven away. Frigid chi erupted, spreading out to 2,700 meters, 2,760 meters, 2,850 meters, 2,940 meters. Within the space of a few breaths of time, the frigid chi had filled an area of 2,997 meters. There were only 3 meters left. 3 meters to the frigid adept level. Frigid adept. Bai Xiaochun roared as his eyes snapped open. Intense rumbling sounds echoed out from his cultivation base as the frigid chi in his heaven Dao gold core continued to expand. In that moment, the area covered by his frigid chi reached 3,000 meters. The intense coldness within that area was such that the ground was completely iced over, turning the area into a world of freezing ice. In that moment, Bai Xiaochun's heaven Dao gold core broke through from the early stage to the mid gold core stage. Simultaneously, a heaven Dao aura spread out in all directions. Outside of that 3,000-meter area, the desert was just as hot as ever. However, because of the presence of the intense cold right next to it, even the air began to shatter. It was a completely and utterly shocking sight. Bai Xiaochun's eyes overflowed with excitement, and then flickered, causing numerous illusory projections to appear within the 3,000-meter area, all of which looked exactly like Bai Xiaochun. These were none other than his frigid shadows. Suddenly, he switched places with one of them. There was no speed involved, because it was just like a teleportation. If anyone had been there to see so many versions of Bai Xiaochun, they would definitely have gasped in shock. Moments later, the numerous frigid shadows converged, revealing Bai Xiaochun's true form. Waving his sleeve, he dispelled the area of coldness, allowing the heat to sweep back in. The resulting tempest sent his hair whipping about as he threw his head back and laughed heartily.